The California sun hung low, bathing the Golden Coast estate in a golden haze, when a voice sliced through the air like a shard of glass. "You're bathing my son like a stray dog!" Elise Harper's words cracked with the precision of a whip, freezing Ethan Cole mid-motion. The garden hose in his calloused hand sputtered, its stream catching the light in a cascade of glittering droplets that danced over the dark curls of little Liam, who giggled in a wide plastic tub on the sun-warmed patio. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. The breeze stilled, the water paused, and Liam's laughter hung suspended in the heavy silence. Elise stood at the edge of the marble path, her stilettos sinking into the soft grout. Her tailored black pantsuit creased from a hurried drive. Behind designer sunglasses, her eyes burned like polished steel, locked on the scene as if it had dared to unravel her carefully constructed world. Ethan turned slowly, setting the hose down with a deliberate calm that belied the storm brewing between them. His uniform shirt clung to his frame, half soaked, sleeves rolled to reveal freckled arms streaked with dried water. He said nothing at first, nor did Liam, the 2-year-old whose wide eyes flickered to the woman in the doorway. The boy's smile didn't fade. It froze, caught between joy and uncertainty. "I asked you a question," Elise snapped, her voice sharper now, cutting through the warm air. Ethan rose to his full height, his presence steady, unreadable, a quiet mountain against her tempest. "He got muddy," he said simply, his voice low, measured. "He was playing." Elise's hand shot up, her fury spilling over. "And you thought the proper response was to drag him outside and spray him down like—" She faltered, the word catching in her throat. Liam, oblivious, splashed a hand in the tub, sending a wave of water onto Ethan's pants. Ethan didn't flinch, didn't look down. "I didn't drag him anywhere," he said, his tone even. "He asked, said he wanted water time. He laughed, Ms. Harper. He laughed." Elise's lips tightened, her heart twisting at the sound of that word. Laughter, something she'd rationed like a scarce resource. "My son was scheduled for music therapy at 3, she said, her voice brittle with control. "Structured play by 4. I come home to find him half naked in a plastic bin while my janitor plays summer camp." Ethan's jaw clenched, a flicker of defiance in his steady gaze, but his voice remained calm. "You came home early." Elise stepped forward, her heels clacking on the wet tile, each step a declaration of her fraying authority. "That is not the point." "No," Ethan countered softly, "but it might be the problem." Her eyes flashed, a storm of indignation. "Excuse me?" Ethan broke her gaze, crouching beside Liam, who reached up with tiny fingers to clutch at a button on his damp shirt, as if anchoring himself to the only safety he knew in that moment. "You know what he said when I filled this tub?" Ethan asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper, his eyes on the boy. "He said, 'Daddy used to fill water here.' Then he said, 'No more water time. Mommy doesn't like mess.'" Elise flinched, a crack in her polished armor, the words landing like a quiet accusation. Ethan stood, his gaze steady now. "I didn't plan this. I didn't break your rules on purpose. The upstairs water was off for pipe maintenance. He was already muddy. The sun was out, the hose was near, and the boy wanted to laugh." Elise looked down at Liam, who lifted a soaked plastic dinosaur with a whispered roar, offering it like a fragile olive branch. It didn't soften her. "Mr. Cole," she said coolly, "you were hired to clean floors, not parent my child." Ethan's eyes held hers unflinching. "And yet," he said, "you left him with me." The silence that followed was a blade, sharp and unforgiving, cutting through the walls Elise had built around her heart. Ethan reached for a towel, wrapping Liam with a tenderness that felt like a rebuke, the boy leaning into him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Elise saw it, and the sight burned, a truth she couldn't name. She didn't understand why it shook her so deeply. "You're dismissed for the day," she said, her voice brittle as glass. "I'll have HR follow up." Ethan didn't waver. "I'm not on contract, just day-to-day hire. You want me gone? Say the word. But maybe ask your son first." Elise opened her mouth, but no words came. Liam turned to her, the damp towel draped like a cape, and whispered, "Happy." The word landed like a stone in the well of her chest, heavy with meaning she wasn't ready to face. Ethan didn't gloat, didn't smile. He simply nodded, handed Liam to the nanny who materialized silently at the back door, and gathered his tools. His steps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing like a punctuation mark on truths Elise refused to admit. She stood there long after the tiles dried, torn between the chaos of the patio and the ache of watching her son look at a janitor like he was the safest harbor in a storm. "I want a full background check on him tonight," Elise said later, her tone slicing through the sun-drenched kitchen, sharp enough to cut glass. Nora Quinn, her assistant of nearly a decade, blinked across the gleaming marble island. "You mean the janitor?" Elise's eyes flicked up from her untouched espresso, her chest still raw from the patio. "Yes, the janitor." Nora hesitated, tapping her tablet. "Just to confirm, Ethan Cole?" Elise nodded, her fingers tightening around the cup. "He's only been here 6 weeks, Nora said. "Exactly," Elise snapped. "And in 6 weeks, my son says more to him than to his own mother." Nora paused, her voice softening. "That's not entirely a bad thing, Elise." Elise's gaze sharpened, a warning. Nora raised her hands. "I'm just saying, some people have a warmth kids gravitate toward." Elise stood abruptly, shoving the espresso aside as if it had betrayed her. "I need to know who he is before he puts another drop of water on my child." 2 hours later, Nora returned, stepping into Elise's home office where blueprints lay untouched, a pretense of focus. "Here it is," Nora said, placing a file on the desk with care. "Ethan Cole, 38, former structural engineer, worked for Crestwood Partners, a top firm in Rainhaven, designed award-winning eco-housing for low-income communities. Married. His wife, Amara, passed away in childbirth 3 years ago. 1 son. No criminal record. Clean as snow." Elise flipped through the file, her fingers tracing photos, certificates, a newspaper clipping. "Young engineer honored with National Humanitarian Award for Eco-Housing Initiative." She looked up, her voice tight. "Why is he a janitor?" Nora shrugged. "He walked away after Amara died. Took his son, moved to LA, started odd jobs. Floors are quieter than grief, I guess." Elise swallowed, the image of Ethan's steady eyes and the way he'd wrapped Liam in a towel returning with a clarity that stung. "He's too involved," she muttered, standing and pacing to the window overlooking the yard. "Liam's attaching to him. It's not healthy. I don't need someone playing parent. I need someone who does their job." Nora frowned. "But isn't that the point?" she asked softly. "He is doing the job Liam needs most." Elise turned, her heart a battlefield of control and surrender, the weight of her son's laughter heavier than any empire she'd built. Nora's voice was a quiet anchor in the storm of Elise's resolve. "He is doing his job," she said carefully, her eyes steady across the gleaming kitchen island. "You just didn't know which one Liam needed most." Elise spun, her spine rigid, her voice a blade of ice. "You're speaking out of line." Nora didn't flinch, her gaze unwavering, a lighthouse in the fog of Elise's anger. "No, I'm speaking as someone who watched a little boy cry for the first time because someone left." The words landed like a slap, sharp and stinging, cracking the polished facade Elise had worn for years. Her breath caught, but her voice stayed cold. "I want him gone by the end of the day. Make sure he understands it's not personal." Nora's silence was louder than any argument, a heavy pause that spoke of truths Elise wasn't ready to face. She turned away, her heart a battlefield of pride and regret. In the dim light of the garage, Ethan Cole wiped his hands on a worn rag, his movements slow, deliberate, as if he'd been expecting the envelope Nora held out. He glanced at it once, his tired eyes flickering with something unspoken. "I figured," he said simply, his voice a low rumble, like distant thunder over the Golden Coast hills. "No one's angry," Nora offered, her tone softer now, a bridge between duty and compassion. "It's just, Elise prefers more structure." Ethan nodded once, slow and measured. "She runs her life like a blueprint. I'm a stain she can't scrub out." Nora's lips curved into a gentle smile, her eyes warm with understanding. "Maybe you're more like a misdrawn line, the kind that changes the whole design for the better." A flicker of gratitude sparked in Ethan's weary gaze, the first crack in his stoic exterior. "Tell her," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Liam never cried with me, but he always missed her." That night, the silence in Elise's sprawling estate was deafening. She passed Liam's room, expecting the familiar echo of giggles, Ethan's low voice weaving tales of dinosaur battles or rumbling truck noises. Instead, there was nothing, just a hollow quiet that pressed against her chest. She peered inside. Liam lay awake, his small frame curled beneath the covers, eyes wide and unblinking, staring at the ceiling as if searching for answers in its shadows. "Liam," she said softly, her voice trembling with a tenderness she rarely allowed. He didn't turn. She crossed the room, her steps tentative, and sat on the edge of his bed. "Sweetheart, it's time to sleep." Silence. "Would you like your book?" Still nothing. Her hand rested on his small back, warm and unmoving, a fragile tether to the boy she loved but didn't know how to reach. Then in a voice so soft it nearly broke her, he whispered, "Did Daddy go away?" Elise's breath caught, her heart splintering. "Water, Daddy," Liam murmured, his voice trembling. "Did he leave because I laughed too loud?" The question hit her like a freight train, shattering the walls she'd built around her heart. She wanted to say no, to promise it wasn't his fault, but the truth tangled in her throat, caught between pride and pain. "He just had to go home, honey," she said finally, her voice cracking. Liam blinked, his eyes glistening. "I don't like home when he's not here." The words were a curtain falling on her composure, heavy and final. Elise turned off the light, stepped into the hallway, and let the door close behind her, her heart pounding like a drum in her ears. She stumbled to her office, pulled out her phone, and stared at Ethan's number in Nora's report. But she didn't call. She was Elise Harper, CEO, philanthropist, a woman who had clawed her way from her father's bankrupt legacy to build an empire of glass and steel. She didn't call janitors in the middle of the night because her son couldn't sleep. Instead, she did what she knew best. She made a list. Interview new childminder. Reinstate structured play. Reinforce boundaries. Eliminate unnecessary emotional variables. Her pen paused, the last line staring back like a quiet accusation. She scratched it out, her hand trembling, and wrote instead, "Understand what Liam needs, not what looks good on paper." The pen fell from her fingers, the paper folded, and for the first time in years, Elise Harper cried, alone, without press or boardroom. Just a mother realizing she hadn't been parenting. She'd been performing, and the audience had stopped clapping. The next morning, Elise stood by the nursery door, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. On the other side of the glass, Liam's wails pierced the air. Not tantrums, not hunger, but jagged, breathless sobs that clawed at the marrow of her bones. "Is this normal?" she asked without turning, her voice tight with fear. The nanny, a woman with a pristine resume and eyes colder than steel, nodded stiffly. "He's overstimulated. He'll calm down once he understands who's in charge." Elise's jaw tightened, her gaze fixed on the tub in the adjacent bathroom. Warm water, rubber ducks, lavender-scented soap. Everything perfect, everything appropriate. Yet Liam stood beside it, fists clenched, body trembling as if cornered by an invisible threat. "Try again," the nanny said flatly, reaching for his wrist. Liam shrieked, a sound that sliced through Elise's heart. "Stop!" she snapped, louder than she meant, her voice echoing off the tiles. "Let him be." The nanny froze, glancing back. "Ma'am, if we give in, we set a precedent." Elise stepped forward, dropping to Liam's level, her eyes soft but fierce. "Hey," she whispered, "it's okay." Liam turned, his face blotchy, nose running, eyes red with tears. "No water, no water, no water," he chanted, his voice breaking. "But you love water," Elise said gently. "You love baths." He shook his head fiercely. "Not with her." She paused, her heart stuttering. "Why not?" His lip quivered, and in 3 small words, he shattered her world. "Because she doesn't laugh." The truth split Elise open, raw and undeniable. She stood slowly, her voice steady but firm. "You're dismissed for today." The nanny blinked, stunned. "Excuse me? I'll pay your full rate," Elise said. "But please leave." The tension hung thick, a long, pregnant pause, but the woman finally obeyed. When the door clicked shut, the room exhaled, and Elise sat beside the tub, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. Liam sniffled in the corner, arms wrapped around his knees. She tried to smile. "Want me to read you something?" He shook his head. "I could put on your music." Still no response. The silence thickened, heavy as fog. Then in a moment that felt like stepping off a cliff, Elise stood, rolled up her silk sleeves, and dipped her manicured hand into the water. She splashed, the sound sharp and playful. Liam looked up, startled. Elise's eyes widened with mock seriousness. "Did you hear that? I think there's a water monster in here, a very naughty one." She splashed again, louder, water arcing through the air. Liam's lip twitched, a spark of life in his eyes. She splashed once more, soaking her blouse, and gasped dramatically. "He got me, Liam! Help! Only you can stop him!" A long beat passed, then a giggle. Small, fragile, but real. Liam crawled toward the tub, dipping a finger, then a hand, then a foot. Splash. Water erupted, soaking Elise head to toe, her expensive shirt clinging to her ribs, her blowout ruined. But she laughed, really laughed, a sound that felt like freedom. Liam stood in the tub, stomping with glee. "Got him!" he shouted. "You did," Elise said, breathless, her heart swelling with a joy she hadn't known she could feel. That night, Elise dried Liam off herself, slipping him into soft pajamas, brushing his damp curls, kissing a small bruise on his shin without thinking. She sat by his bed, flipping through a book, but Liam stared out the window, quiet. "Mommy," he asked softly, "can we go find Daddy? Ethan?" Her heart twisted, a sharp ache of guilt and love. "He had to go back to his home, sweetie," she said, her voice trembling. Liam's eyes drooped. "He said home is where people wait for you." Elise's throat tightened. "But I'm waiting here," he whispered, yawning. She turned off the light, her fingers trembling, and sat alone on the hallway floor, her soaked blouse still in the laundry, her heart even wetter. The next morning in the kitchen, Nora poured coffee, glancing at Elise. "You look like you got ambushed by a rogue water monster." Elise cracked a tired smile. "He laughed," she whispered. He actually laughed with me." Nora set down the pot, her eyes warm. "That's amazing." Elise nodded, then added, "But he still asked for Ethan." Nora watched her carefully. "Do you want him back?" Elise didn't answer right away, her gaze distant. "I want to believe I'm enough," she said finally. "But the truth is, Ethan doesn't try to be perfect. He just shows up." Nora smiled softly. "Maybe that's what makes him perfect." Elise looked up, her voice quieter than a breath, her heart caught between fear and hope. A mother learning to choose love over control. "What if I've built my entire life on a blueprint that never made space for laughter?" Elise Harper's voice was a fragile whisper, trembling in the quiet of the Golden Coast kitchen. Nora Quinn leaned forward, her eyes soft but unflinching. "Then maybe it's time to draw a new one." The words settled in Elise's chest, heavy with truth, not crushing but grounding, like the first rain on parched earth. That night, as she tucked Liam into bed, his small voice pierced the darkness. "I like you, messy mommy," he said, his eyes bright with a sincerity that stopped her heart. "You're funny when you splash." Elise froze, her breath catching, then bent to kiss his forehead, her lips trembling against his soft skin. "Good night, baby," she whispered, closing the door and leaning against it. Her heart cracked open, not broken, but open, letting slivers of light seep through the fissures. The attic smelled of cedar and forgotten time, a sanctuary of silence Elise hadn't breached in years. Dust danced like lazy snowflakes in a shaft of late afternoon light, slicing across the creaking floorboards. Boxes, labeled in Nora's precise handwriting, lined the shelves. Financials 2020, press kits, legal, Vivian's things. The last one tugged at her heart, a pang of memory. But she wasn't here for her mother today. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a faded blue banker's box marked Staff Temporary, 1099 Archive. Dragging it to the floor, she sank cross-legged in her linen slacks, the fabric whispering against the wood as she peeled back the lid. Inside, amidst payroll stubs and outdated forms, was what she sought. Ethan Cole's file, neat and unassuming, a quiet testament to a life she'd overlooked. She opened it, her breath shallow. A resume in blocky font listed a bachelor's in civil engineering, a master's from Stanford, letters of recommendation from CEOs, nonprofit directors, even a former mayor. Taped to the inside flap was a crumpled clipping from the Rainhaven Times. Young engineer honored with National Humanitarian Award for Eco-Housing Initiative. The photo showed Ethan, younger, clean-shaven, holding a small girl on his hip, his smile warm against a sea of camera flashes. The caption noted she wasn't his daughter, but a child from the project's pilot shelter. Yet the way he held her, steady, protective, stirred something deep in Elise's chest. She traced the crease in the paper, her fingers lingering. Why? Why had a man with such a legacy ended up mopping her floors? The answer lay beneath, in a worn manila envelope tucked behind the resume. She unfolded hand-drawn blueprints, their edges smudged with time. A community center shaped like a semicircle, its courtyard blooming with trees, benches curving like open arms. Classrooms, reading nooks, rainwater harvesting tanks, children's play areas textured with sand and water. No plastic, just earth. At the bottom in pencil, a line read, "If we build like children deserve to be happy, the world might finally listen." Elise stared, the words echoing like a voice from the past. Another sheet marked Dream Draft Only revealed a more personal vision. A house, modest but open, with one master room, one child's room, a kitchen bathed in natural light, a wraparound porch. Beneath the title, in Ethan's steady hand, "For Amara, for who we would have become." Elise's breath left her in a slow, aching exhale. This wasn't a janitor. This was a man who'd once built futures, now sweeping away his own grief. That night, long after Liam slept, Elise sat at the kitchen table, the blueprints spread before her, anchored by salt shakers and a toy dinosaur. A half-drunk glass of wine caught the overhead lights, casting fractured reflections across the marble. Nora padded in, barefoot, her tie loosened from a long day. "Wow," she said, stopping short. "You went digging." Elise didn't look up. "He used to build hope, literally." Nora pulled out a chair, her gaze soft on the sketches. "What happened?" "His wife, Amara, died," Elise said quietly, "in childbirth. He walked away from everything, moved to LA with a baby boy and a broken heart." Nora nodded, her eyes tracing the blueprints. "And you hired him to clean tile." Elise flinched, the truth a sharp sting. "Don't." "I'm not judging," Nora said gently. "I'm just seeing the full picture." Elise ran a finger along a curved line, her voice barely audible. "He drew homes like they were meant to breathe." Nora sipped her tea, then offered, "Maybe Liam trusts him not just because he plays dinosaurs, but because Ethan sees kids the way architects see buildings, full of potential, worth protecting." Elise blinked hard, fighting tears. "Do you think he hates me?" Nora's look was kind but unflinching. "No, but I think he pities you." The words stung, and Nora didn't soften them. "You're brilliant, Elise, but you manage motherhood like a quarterly report. Efficient, flawless, emotionally bankrupt." Silence stretched, heavy and raw. Elise whispered, "I don't know how to be anything else." Nora leaned in, her voice steady. "Then maybe it's time someone taught you." The next day, Elise pulled into a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the Golden Coast, where tree-lined streets cradled faded fences and yards littered with forgotten toys and chalk-drawn dreams. Ethan's bungalow stood modest, its cracked steps and whispering wind chimes a far cry from her polished estate. She knocked, her heart pounding. Footsteps. The door opened, and Ethan stood there in a gray t-shirt and jeans, a dish towel in hand, his eyes flickering with surprise. "Ms. Harper," he said flatly. Elise swallowed. "I wanted to talk." He stepped aside, wordless, letting her in. I found your plans, she said, her voice trembling. The house, the shelter, the community circle. They're beautiful. Ethan didn't move, his silence a wall. I didn't know, she continued, you about Amara, your work, what you gave up. He folded the towel slowly, placing it on the couch. I wasn't hiding it. I just wasn't offering. Elise stepped closer, her voice earnest. Why this job? Ethan met her gaze, his eyes steady. Because the only place my son heard another child laugh was your backyard. The words landed like thunder, shaking the foundations of her carefully built world. He continued, quieter. I took the job to pay bills. I stayed because Liam found someone to echo with. You were building silence around him. I couldn't let him forget what joy sounded like. Elise's voice broke. You think I'm a bad mother? I think you're scared, Ethan said, unflinching. Of noise, of losing control, of getting it wrong. She blinked, fighting a wave of emotion. I was just trying to protect him. Ethan nodded. Then start by protecting what matters. Not the schedule, not the image, just his heart. A long pause hung between them, heavy with possibility. Elise's voice shook. Would you ever finish the project? The one for the kids? Ethan looked away. I don't know. What if I helped? She offered, her heart laid bare. He turned, really looking at her this time. Why would you want to build something like that? Her answer came from a place she hadn't known still existed. Because I'm starting to realize I've built a life no one wants to live inside. The storm came without warning, a sudden roar that drowned the Golden Coast's cicada hum. Thunder rolled low, like a warning too late to heed, and rain fell in torrents, hammering the glass sunroom, soaking the ivy in seconds. Elise stood in her office, phone pressed to her ear. Did you reschedule the board call? She asked. Yes, ma'am, Nora replied, her voice tense. But there's another issue. Liam's not in his room. Elise froze, her heart plummeting. What do you mean, not in his room? I mean, Nora said, her voice dropping. He's outside in the rain. The phone slipped from Elise's hand, bouncing off the armchair as she ran, her heels slipping on the slick concrete path. The backyard was a chaos of water and shadow, rain slapping the patio, pooling beneath a table where Liam sat, trembling, soaked to the bone, alone. Elise rushed forward, scooping him into her arms, his small body icy against her warmth. Liam, she whispered, her voice breaking. What are you doing out here? His lips were blue, his eyes wide with desperate hope. Water time, he murmured, waiting for Daddy Ethan. Her chest split open, a clean break of guilt and love. She pulled him close, racing inside, barking orders for towels, blankets, a doctor. On the couch, she held him tightly, her designer suit drenched, mascara streaking down her face, none of it mattering. I'm sorry, she whispered, a mantra of regret. But apologies couldn't stop the fever that burned through Liam by evening. The pediatrician came, checked vitals, prescribed meds, his voice heavy with warning. Elise sat by his side, clutching his damp hand, her world reduced to the rise and fall of his chest, each breath a fragile thread holding her together. The pediatrician's voice carried a weight Elise Harper despised, a gravity that whispered of loss and fragility. Watch him tonight, he said, each word a stone sinking into the pit of her stomach. She sat by Liam's bedside, her hand clutching his damp fingers, the soft beep of machines a cruel counterpoint to the storm's fading roar outside. The silence was heavier than the rain, pressing against her chest, amplifying the ache of her failures. Nora brought a bowl of soup, its steam curling in the dim light, but Elise didn't touch it, her eyes fixed on the fragile rise and fall of her son's chest. He went looking for him, she said finally, her voice a raw whisper. Ethan. He thought he was coming. Nora sat beside her, her presence steady, a quiet anchor. Because Ethan always did. Elise nodded, a slow, painful motion, her heart unraveling. I fired the only person he trusted, and now I'm watching my son breathe like it's a maybe. The words hung in the air, heavy with regret, sharp with truth. Nora's hand rested on her shoulder, warm and grounding. Do you want me to call him? Elise swallowed, her throat tight. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. He already left once. Why would he come back for us again? Nora didn't argue, but her eyes held a truth Elise couldn't face. He would. That night, sleep eluded Elise, her head resting on her arm beside Liam's bed, her heart a battlefield of guilt and hope. Ethan's blueprints lay on her desk, their lines haunting her. A small house with a wraparound porch, wide windows promising light and warmth. She'd memorized every curve, every angle, a stark contrast to the cold towers of power she'd built her life upon. Each rung climbed in heels too high, each room too sterile. She had no blueprint for this, for love, for softness, for the beautiful mess of motherhood. In the dark, she whispered to Liam's pale face, "Did he ever tell you how much he stayed after I pushed him away?" Her voice cracked, "Because I didn't, but I will now." By morning, the fever broke, and Elise wept silently, her tears mingling with Liam's damp curls as the pediatrician nodded with quiet relief. Liam stirred, his eyes fluttering open, blinking up at her. "Hi, baby," she whispered, brushing back his hair. "Did Daddy Ethan come?" he asked, his voice raspy, fragile. Elise kissed his forehead, her heart twisting. "No, sweetheart, but Mommy's here." He blinked, quiet, his small voice heavy. "I waited." She nodded, her throat tight. "I know, love." A pause, then a whisper that shattered her. "Was I bad?" Elise's heart splintered, her voice fierce. "No," she said. "You were never bad. You were more than I was ready for." Liam's eyes closed, drifting into sleep, and she held his hand like a vow, a promise to be more. Later in her office, the windows bore streaks of the storm's retreat, but the blueprints on her desk held her gaze. Elise reached for her phone, her fingers steady this time. She dialed, the ring echoing once, twice, then Ethan's voice, steady but guarded. "It's me," she said, her breath slow. "Elise." A pause. "I figured." She cut to the heart of it. "Liam got sick. He went outside in the rain looking for you." She heard his breath catch, a sharp intake across the line. "I didn't know how much he'd held on to you," she continued, her voice cracking. "How much you mattered. I thought structure could replace presence, that safety meant walls and boundaries. But I forgot children don't need protection from joy." Silence stretched, heavy and raw. "Is he okay?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet, urgent. "He's stable," she said. "Better now." Another pause. "I shouldn't have let you go," she added, her words raw. "This isn't about professionalism or boundaries. It's me being honest." Ethan was silent then. "I didn't stay for you." "I know," she said. "You stayed for him." She nodded, though he couldn't see, her heart laid bare. "And now I'm asking you to come back. For him. And for you," he asked, softer now. Her voice faltered. "I don't know how to ask for things I don't deserve." A beat of silence then. "Maybe don't ask," he said. "Just let me choose." Elise closed her eyes, letting his words settle deep. "I hope you choose us," she whispered. "I already did," he said, his voice steady. "You just didn't see it." That evening, as the Golden Coast sun painted the windows gold, Elise sat by Liam's bed. His cheeks held color again, his fingers curled around his plush dinosaur. Footsteps echoed softly from the hallway, the front door creaking open downstairs. Her heart pounded as the bedroom door opened, and Liam stirred, his eyes fluttering. When he saw Ethan in the doorway, a small, radiant smile broke across his face, the same one that had bloomed under a garden hose. "Daddy Ethan," he whispered, his voice weak but alive. Ethan crossed the room, dropping to one knee, taking Liam's hand with a tenderness that spoke of unspoken promises. "I heard you waited," he said softly. Liam nodded, his eyelids heavy. Ethan leaned closer. "Thank you for waiting." Elise watched, her arms crossed not in defense but in awe, her heart swelling with a truth she'd long denied. For the first time, she wasn't a CEO managing a life. She was a woman welcomed into one. But the silence lingered, heavy and watchful, clinging to the corners of her estate like dust on forgotten shelves. Even after Liam's fever broke, even after Ethan returned, tucking the boy in with a steady calm only he could bring, Elise felt an unsettled hum in her chest. Not fear, Not guilt, but something older, unfinished. She couldn't sleep, couldn't sit still. The house was dim, the staff dismissed, Nora asleep upstairs. Ethan had left after dinner, his departure quiet, without promises. Elise watched his silhouette fade through the rain-washed courtyard, a voice in her chest whispering, "Don't let him be the only one brave enough to stay." She wandered into the old library, not the sleek, modern one for press photos, but her mother's, its shelves groaning under dusty hardcovers, the air thick with cedar, pipe smoke, and Vivian Chanel. She closed the door, sealing herself in memory. In the corner, behind a row of biographies, was a hidden latch. A click, and the bottom panel opened, revealing a compartment untouched since she was 22. Vivian Harper had been cold, brilliant, feared, admired, but never warm. Elise pulled out a leather folder bound in crimson ribbon, a yellowed letter tucked inside. She unfolded it with trembling hands. "To my daughter, if she ever decides to stop pretending." Her breath caught. "You were born into a world I built to protect you, but I raised you behind glass, shiny, strong, untouchable. A daughter no one could crack, not even herself. You think parenting is about outcomes, about success. It isn't. It's about being the place they fall when the world is too much. About being there, not perfect. If you're reading this, you've broken something, or been broken. Good. That means you're soft enough to feel, real enough to begin. A child doesn't need a CEO. They need someone who stays, who listens when they have nothing left to say. Be the one your child runs to, not the one the world claps for." Elise read it once, twice, the words blurring through tears. She pressed the letter to her chest, whispering, "You knew all this time." The next morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen floorboards, painting them gold. Liam sat at the table, building a tower of cereal pieces, his laughter a melody Elise hadn't realized she'd missed. Ethan wiped down the counter, sleeves rolled up, hands steady, a quiet strength in every motion. Elise entered, holding Vivian's letter, and set it before him. "It's from my mother," she said. "She died before Liam was born. We didn't get along." Ethan scanned the first lines, then paused, his eyes thoughtful. "She sounds like she knew more than she let on." Elise nodded. "She always did." He folded the letter carefully, handing it back. "Thank you for showing me." She hesitated, her voice soft. "Do you think people like us get second chances?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He poured her a coffee, black, no sugar, just as she liked, and set it before her. "Only if we stop using the first one to prove we were right," he said. Elise looked into the steam, then at him. "I've spent my life proving things." "I know," he said gently. "Then what now?" He shrugged, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe start proving you're here." Liam's cereal tower collapsed with a splash, and he let out a triumphant cheer. Elise laughed, a real, unguarded sound. And Ethan watched her, silent, because sometimes the loudest breakthroughs begin in quiet moments. Later, Nora found Elise in the garden, barefoot, snipping lavender, her face calm in a way it hadn't been in years. "You look suspiciously serene," Nora teased. Elise smiled. "I found something I didn't know I needed." Nora raised a brow. "A flower with Wi-Fi?" "A letter," Elise said, "from my mother." Nora stilled. "You kept it?" Elise nodded. "It wasn't full of apologies, but it was honest." Nora sat on the fountain's edge. "What did it say?" Elise looked to the courtyard, where Liam rolled a toy truck across sun-warmed stone, his laughter echoing. "It said I've been parenting with a clipboard, but he needs someone who knows how to catch." Nora's smile was warm, a beacon in the golden haze of the Golden Coast garden. "So, what's next?" she asked, her voice light but laced with expectation. Elise's eyes sparked, bright with a clarity she hadn't known in years. "I stopped protecting the image," she said, her voice steady, "and start building something real." That evening, she didn't call from the house line or through Nora. She used her cell, her fingers trembling with purpose as she dialed. Ethan picked up on the second ring, his voice a low, steady hum. "Ethan, it's me," she said. "I know," he replied, a quiet acknowledgement that held no judgment. She hesitated, then pressed forward. I want to ask you something. I'm listening, he said, his tone open but guarded. There's a project, she began slowly. One you started but didn't finish. A house, a shelter, a place for kids who don't have anyone yet. Amara's Haven. A pause then. I remember, he said, his voice softer now, heavy with memory. I want to help you build it. Silence stretched, but it wasn't cold anymore. It was alive, pulsing with possibility. Why? He asked, his voice steady as stone. Elise didn't flinch. Because I spent a decade building things that looked good in magazines, but none of them could hold the sound of my son's laughter. Another pause, heavy with unspoken truths. I can't offer perfection, she added, her voice raw, but I can offer land, resources, hands. Ethan's voice dropped, a quiet challenge. And what about heart? She held her breath, then answered from a place deep and uncharted. You gave enough of yours already. Let me bring mine this time. He exhaled slowly, a sound like the first breath after a long dive. Okay, he said. Elise closed her eyes, relief washing over her. Okay? Yes, he said, his voice resolute. Let's build something that feels like home. That night, after Liam drifted into sleep, his small hand clutching his plush dinosaur, Elise sat beside him in the dark. No emails, no plans, just the quiet rhythm of his breathing and the weight of her own heart. She held his hand, whispering stories she'd once thought too silly for a woman like her. Tales of water monsters and brave knights in muddy boots. Liam stirred, his voice a sleepy mumble. Mommy? Yes, baby. Do we have a home now? Her lips brushed his forehead, warm and soft. We're learning how to build one, she whispered, together. The old lot was a relic of forgotten dreams, its cracked cement and weed-choked gravel a stark contrast to the polished estates of the Golden Coast. To Ethan Cole, it was sacred ground, the last place he'd felt like a man with a future. He stood there, boots sinking into soft dirt, hands on his hips, sweat beading under the midday sun. A blueprint case rested under his arm, its edges worn but unyielding. Beside him, a battered sign creaked in the breeze. Future site of Amara's Haven, a community home for healing hearts. He hadn't returned in 3 years, hadn't wanted to, not since he stood here with a baby in his arms and a folded death certificate in his pocket. Now he held a pencil and a phone buzzing with Elise Harper's name. He didn't answer. Not yet. Elise waited by her car, hands tucked into the pockets of a trench coat she rarely wore. Her heels traded for sneakers that bore the faint stains of new courage. Her hair danced in the wind, her expression unreadable as she watched Ethan from a distance. A silent partner in a moment heavy with history. She approached slowly, her steps tentative on the uneven ground. I didn't think you'd come, she said softly. Ethan didn't turn. Didn't think you'd remember where this place was. She stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. I didn't. Nora did. He cracked a half smile, still not looking at her. Of course she did. Elise stood beside him, gazing at the barren lot, the wind tugging at her coat. After a moment, she asked, What stopped you from building it? Ethan finally met her eyes, his voice low, raw. The day I got the permits, Amara died. Elise didn't speak. She didn't need to. She was 26, he continued, his gaze distant. Bright, stubborn, wild. She'd been helping kids since she was one herself. She said, if we couldn't have more, we'd raise everyone else's. He crouched, touching the dirt, letting it slip through his fingers like a memory he couldn't hold. I brought our son here once, 3 months old, stood in this spot and whispered to the ground, I'm sorry. Elise crouched beside him, her voice gentle. Sorry for what? For surviving, he said, his voice breaking. For not knowing how to keep her. For folding the dream instead of carrying it. The wind rustled through the lot, carrying the sound of plastic wrappers like dry leaves. Elise placed a hand on the blueprint case. Unfold it, she said quietly. He glanced at her, searching. You said it yourself, she added. This place was drawn with love, pain, and hope. That's the foundation it needs. Ethan stood, unrolling the plans onto the hood of her car. The sketches were worn, edges curled, but the vision glowed. Rooms like open arms, curved walls, soft corners, sunlight spilling everywhere. Elise traced a line with her finger. "You built this for children. For children who don't get to be children," he said, his voice steady but heavy. Her eyes met his, something fierce and unreadable in them. "Then let's make sure this time they do." By noon they were deep in work, a rhythm born of shared purpose. Ethan measured ground lines, adjusting angles, recalibrating the garden wall's curve. Elise held stakes, sketched alongside him, her white button-down streaked with mud, a badge of her surrender to something real. "You're not afraid to get dirty," Ethan said, surprise in his voice. "I spent years in sterile boardrooms building cold empires," she replied, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Turns out, mud is healing." He chuckled, a low, warm sound. "Careful. That almost sounded poetic." She smirked, brushing dirt from her hands. "Don't get used to it." They worked in tandem, a silent symphony of effort and understanding, until Elise stopped, staring at her trembling hands. "They're shaking," she said, her voice small. Ethan stepped closer. "Let me see." He took her fingers, turning them gently. "You're not used to labor," he said softly. "Give it time." She shook her head, her eyes raw. "That's not it. I'm scared. Of the vision, the vulnerability of dreaming again. I'm scared this isn't enough, that it's just another project, that it won't heal him, or me." Ethan's voice softened, steady as stone. "Healing doesn't come from the roof or the walls. It comes from who stays inside them." Her eyes welled, but she held his gaze. "What if I don't know how to stay?" He didn't flinch. "Start small," he said. "Stay for the next conversation, the next splash, the next laugh." He released her hand, a gentle smile breaking through. "You don't build a home in one day. You build it moment by moment." As the sky burned gold, Liam arrived with Nora, his red hoodie a bright splash against the dusty path. He ran toward them, tiny boots splashing in a leftover puddle. "Mom!" he shouted. "Why are your pants dirty?" Elise laughed, wiping sweat from her brow. "Because I helped Daddy Ethan dig a foundation." Liam's eyes widened, sparkling with wonder. "You digged?" Ethan crouched beside him, his voice warm. "We dug, buddy." Liam grinned, his face alight. "Can I help dig too?" Elise and Ethan exchanged a glance, a silent agreement forged in shared hope. "Absolutely," she said. And just like that, a boy with a plastic shovel joined two adults with wounded hearts, sketching something new into the earth. Not perfect, but promised. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the bare ground, Elise stood beside Ethan. "This is the first time I've built something without expecting applause," she said, her voice soft. He looked at her, his eyes steady. "How does it feel?" She paused, the answer blooming in her chest. "It feels true." Ethan nodded, his hands muddy, tired, full. "You said your son heard another child laugh in my backyard. That's why you stayed." He smiled gently. "Yes." Elise met his gaze, her voice firm. "Today I laughed in yours. That's why I'm staying." For Ethan, a man who'd once folded dreams into a drawer, something unfolded in his chest. Not blueprints, but belonging. Liam's laughter rose, soft and steady. A song rediscovered, not loud but undeniable, like a breeze stirring wind chimes on a quiet afternoon, making the world pause. Elise stood barefoot in the sunroom doorway, a cold mug of tea cradled in her hands, watching Liam play on the freshly cleared earth beside the future foundation of Amara's haven. Water arced from a hose in his small hands, wielded like a fireman's tool, his laughter bright and uncontained. Ethan stood just out of reach, arms crossed, his presence a quiet guardian of the boy's joy. When Liam accidentally sprayed his own foot, he squealed, tumbling backward into the grass, his laughter echoing like a melody long forgotten. Ethan didn't rush to help, just chuckled, waiting as Liam caught his breath. Then Liam turned to him, his voice ringing with a name Elise had never heard him use before. "Hattie, watch this!" Her mug slipped slightly, her heart seizing. Ethan glanced up, meeting her eyes for a fleeting moment, then knelt beside Liam, his response soft, unspoken. a quiet exchange that carried the weight of a father's stillness. Elise stood frozen, her chest tight, the name echoing in her mind, a reminder of the bond she hadn't built but couldn't deny. In the quiet of the Golden Coast kitchen, Elise Harper set down her knife, the vegetables forgotten, her movements too precise, too controlled. Ethan Cole leaned against the doorframe, his muddy shoes and damp shirt a testament to the day's chaos, his eyes steady on her. "You heard him," he said, his voice low, a gentle probe into the storm of her thoughts. She didn't look up, her breath a slow exhale. "I did." The word Hattie still echoed in her mind, a name Liam had given Ethan, a title that carried the weight of a bond she hadn't built. Ethan waited, his silence patient, inviting. Elise's gaze met his, her voice trembling with raw honesty. "I thought it would hurt hearing him call someone else that word." Ethan tilted his head, his eyes kind but unflinching. "Did it?" She paused, searching her heart, then shook her head. "No, that's what surprised me. It didn't hurt. It felt right." Her voice softened, vulnerable. "Does that make me weak?" Ethan's expression didn't waver, his voice steady as stone. "No, it makes you brave." Elise swallowed, her throat tight with the weight of years spent shielding herself from such truths. "I've spent so long trying to be everything to him. Mom, dad, guardrail, mentor, therapist." Ethan stepped closer, his presence warm, grounding. "And sometimes kids just want someone who'll sit in the mud and hand them worms." A laugh broke from her, unexpected and bright, shattering the tension. He continued, his voice gentle but firm. "You didn't fail him, Elise. You carried him through the hardest part. You just forgot you were allowed to pass the baton." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What if I don't know how to let go?" Ethan's gaze held hers, unwavering. "You don't have to. You just have to let him reach for someone else without thinking it's because you weren't enough." The silence between them was no longer empty. It brimmed with understanding, with something unspoken but growing, like roots taking hold in quiet earth. That night, as Liam curled into his pillow, Elise pulled the covers over his small frame, her touch tender, deliberate. "Did you have fun today?" she whispered, her voice soft as moonlight. He nodded sleepily, his eyes half closed. "Daddy Ethan is funny," she smiled, her heart aching but warm. "He is." Liam blinked slowly, his voice small. "He's not my real dad, right?" The question landed gently, a pebble in still water. Elise brushed back his hair, her touch steady. "No, sweetheart, he's not your real dad." "Do I have one?" She paused, then answered with raw honesty. "You did, but he didn't stay." Kur. Liam was quiet, his small chest rising and falling. Then, with the weight of a child's wisdom, he murmured, "But Ethan stays." Elise's throat closed, her voice a whisper. "Yes, he stays." Liam turned onto his side, his breathing slowing, and just before sleep claimed him, he mumbled, "I like when people stay." Downstairs, Ethan moved through the kitchen, washing dishes with a slow, methodical grace, each motion a quiet ritual. Elise descended, barefoot, her hair tied back, a sweater slipping off one shoulder. He glanced at her. "You okay?" She nodded, her eyes soft. He asked about his real dad. Ethan set down the sponge, his jaw tensing. "And I told him the truth, that he left." She paused, then added, "But I told him the most important part." Ethan turned to her fully, his gaze steady. "What's that?" "That you stayed." His expression softened, a flicker of something deep and unspoken. "I never wanted to replace anyone," he said. "I wanted him to feel chosen." Elise stepped closer, her voice wavering. "You did more than that. You reminded him what it feels like to be safe, free, to laugh. You reminded me too." Ethan held her gaze, his voice quiet. "Do you know why kids laugh the most? When they feel seen? Laughter is trust out loud." Elise didn't respond. She didn't need to. Instead, she picked up a drying towel standing beside him, their movements synchronized in the quiet. Just before the final dish, she whispered, "I don't know what we are." Ethan's eyes were kind, steady. We're building, he said. That's enough. The next morning, Elise woke to laughter. Not a song, but a melody of joy, echoing through the sunroom's open windows like a gift returned after years of absence. She rose, pulling on a robe, and stepped onto the porch. Liam perched on Ethan's shoulders, his small arms spread like a pilot soaring through the sky, his giggles bright and uncontained. Elise watched, one hand over her heart, and whispered, "Thank you for coming back." Ethan looked over, his smile quiet but sure. "I didn't come back," he said. "I just stopped walking away." The sun was barely cresting when Elise stepped onto the site of Amara's haven, the air sharp with the scent of fresh earth and possibility. The cement lay smooth under her sneakers, lines drawn but not yet filled. Ethan was already there, coffee in hand, sketchbook balanced on his knee, a pencil tucked behind his ear like it was part of him, like he belonged to this place. She stood silently watching him, her arms folded against the morning chill. He looked up, offering a quiet smile. "You're early." She stepped forward, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "Couldn't sleep." He nodded as if he understood, because he did. "Ethan," she said, "what you're building here, I want to help. Not just with funding, I want to be part of it, from the ground up." He arched a brow, surprise flickering. "You want to build a children's center?" "A home," she corrected, her voice firm. "For more than one child, for more than one story." He watched her, as if reading blueprints she hadn't yet shown. "Why?" Elise didn't hesitate, her words spilling from a place raw and true. "Because somewhere between my name on Forbes and the echo in my house, I forgot what living sounds like. Now I remember. It's laughter in a backyard, Liam calling you Daddy Ethan without me apologizing for it. It's something I don't want to lose again." A pause hung between them, heavy with possibility. "Are you asking to be part of the build?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm asking to be taught." Ethan's gaze didn't waver, but he asked something unexpected. "Would you take direction from me?" Elise blinked. "Excuse me." "This project needs humility," he said, his voice low, steady. "Someone not afraid to get dirty, wrong, or lost. Someone who won't run when the walls don't hold." She hesitated, his words cutting deep. "You think I'll run?" He stepped closer, his voice a quiet challenge. "I think you've been running your whole life." The truth stung, sharper than she expected. "I want to stay this time," she whispered, "but I need help learning how." Ethan was silent, then nodded. "All right," he said. "Here's the deal. You show up every day, with your hands, your time, your questions." "I will," she said quickly. "And in return," he added, "I'll teach you how to build something that doesn't need walls to keep people in." She exhaled, relief mingling with resolve. "That's it," he smirked. "You expected more?" "I expected a contract," she said, half joking. Ethan shrugged, pulling a nail from his pocket and holding it up. "This isn't a contract, it's a promise. We build from choice, not paper." He handed it to her, and Elise Harper, CEO of Empires, took it like a vow. That afternoon they worked side by side, not as boss and contractor, not as widow and janitor, but as something new, undefined but growing. Elise held planks while Ethan drilled, his steady hands guiding her to measure twice, cut once. She learned to level a frame, to carry weight across her shoulders, to laugh when the hammer missed its mark. Liam played nearby, dust-streaked and joyful, a boy unburdened by the weight of perfection. Nora stopped by with sandwiches, her eyes widening at the sight. "Who are you?" she asked Elise, teasing but moved. "What have you done with the woman who lost her mind over a chipped manicure?" Elise, sweat-streaked and smiling, raised a brow. "She's under reconstruction." Nora's smile was quiet, heartfelt. "It suits you." That evening, they sat on the unfinished porch, just beams and potential, Liam asleep in Elise's lap, his head heavy on her arm. Ethan sipped lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug, the horizon glowing soft orange. "Do you think I'm different now?" Elise asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't answer immediately, his gaze thoughtful. "You're becoming someone new," he said finally. "That's better than different." She looked down at Liam, her heart full. He didn't ask for a perfect mother. No child does, Ethan replied. They ask for the one who stays through the imperfect. Elise smiled, a quiet truth settling in her chest. I've always been afraid of love without guarantees. Ethan looked at her, his voice soft but certain. Love isn't a guarantee. It's a decision you keep making, even when it doesn't pay off. She nodded, the weight of his words sinking deep. That's terrifying. He chuckled, warm and low. That's family. Elise leaned her head against the beam, her voice a whisper. I think I want that. Ethan glanced at her, his eyes kind. I know. As the sun dipped low, she walked him to his truck, Liam asleep in her arms, his cheeks flushed from the day. Ethan opened the door, then paused. Tomorrow we pour concrete, he said. Big step. Elise shifted Liam's weight, her voice steady. You think we're ready? He looked at her, serious but warm. Ready's a myth. Willing is what builds things. She nodded, and for the first time in years, she didn't need the last word. See you in the morning, she said. Ethan smiled. You already have. The ribbon was simple, unadorned, a strip of white linen stretched between two wooden beams before the new structure of Amara's Haven. The building smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, unfinished in the corporate sense, but ready in the ways that mattered. Ready to hold laughter, to echo footsteps, to cradle healing. Ethan stood beside Elise, holding ceremonial scissors someone had insisted on, though neither cared for the gesture. Nora stood to the side, camera in hand, capturing moments not for headlines, but for the walls, for this story needed memory, not fame. Liam sat on the porch, legs swinging, grinning as if he owned the world, his joy a beacon in the morning light. Elise Harper turned to Ethan Cole, the morning light casting soft shadows across the unfinished porch of Amara's Haven. It doesn't look like the original plan, she said, her voice a mix of wonder and realization. Ethan nodded, his eyes tracing the lines of the structure before them. That's because somewhere along the way, the plan changed. A smile flickered across Elise's face as she brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture unguarded, human. For the better. For the real, Ethan corrected gently, his voice steady, grounding. Elise's gaze drifted to the garden path, where flower beds bloomed with the tender care of children who would soon call this place home. She inhaled deeply, the scent of soil and pine filling her lungs, grounding her in a truth she'd long ignored. I used to build homes to sell them, she said, her eyes meeting his, but now I build homes to fill them. Ethan's expression softened, a quiet pride in his gaze. You're not who you were when I met you. Elise's smile was tentative, honest. I'm still learning. He handed her the ceremonial scissors, their weight a symbol neither fully embraced. Let this be your first finished lesson. Her fingers hesitated, lingering on the handles, letting go still a battle she fought within herself. Then with a breath she smiled and cut. The white linen ribbon fell to the earth like a silent exhale, and the small crowd erupted in applause. Not the polished roar of a corporate gala, but a heartfelt chorus, raw and true. Nora Quinn wiped her eyes behind her sunglasses, her camera capturing the moment for memory, not headlines. Liam clapped the loudest, his small hands a joyful blur, his voice ringing out, Can I go inside now? Elise laughed, a sound bright and unburdened. Yes, sweetheart. Go explore. He bolted toward the open door, arms spread like wings, his laughter echoing like a promise kept. Inside, the air was warm, not from a thermostat, but from the way sunlight poured through skylights, bathing soft couches and reading nooks in a golden glow. A hand-painted mural on the wall whispered, You're safe here, its words of vow etched in color. Elise walked through the rooms, Ethan's hand steady in hers, her fingers grazing the door frames as if touching a dream made real. This place feels like something I would have needed as a child, she said, her voice soft, vulnerable. Ethan nodded, his gaze distant yet present. That's how I designed it. They paused in the main room, a circular space with cushioned bookshelves and a low stage crafted from reclaimed wood. A corkboard hung at the back, pinned with photos from the building process. One of Elise, hair wild, streaked with paint. Another of Ethan, teaching Liam to hold a level, their faces lit with focus and joy. Elise reached into her bag, pulling out a folded sheet and pinned it to the center of the board. Ethan leaned closer, his breath catching as he read the title aloud. The Map of Us. Elise smiled, her eyes bright. It's not architectural, it's emotional. Beneath the title were sketches, a hand reaching for a smaller one, a cup of coffee shared at sunrise, a scraped knee kissed, a cracked voice whispering, I'm sorry, a child's laughter, a man staying, a woman learning to love without permission. Ethan stared, his voice low, reverent. This is better than anything I ever designed. Elise looked at him, her heart open. You helped me draw it. His eyes were clear, steady. You lived it. They stood in silence, the weight of their journey no longer heavy but earned, a foundation built not of cement, but of trust. That evening, as volunteers drifted home, and Nora left with a stack of thank you cards, Elise, Ethan, and Liam lingered on the porch steps, sharing foil-wrapped sandwiches and half-melted juice boxes. Liam leaned against Elise's shoulder, his voice drowsy. Can we live here too? She kissed the top of his head, her lips lingering. We live here in a way, honey. Our hearts do. Liam pointed to the corkboard, visible through the open door. That pictures us? Ethan smiled, his voice warm. All of it is. Liam grinned, his eyes fluttering closed, his small body heavy with the day's joy. Elise looked at Ethan, her voice soft but certain. I never said thank you. He tilted his head, curious. For what? For not walking away the second time. He nodded once, his gaze steady. It was never a second time. It was a pause. I just waited until you were ready to walk with me. Elise looked down, her heart swelling, and Ethan reached over, taking her hand gently. Now, he said, we walk forward. She squeezed his fingers, the porch light buzzing above, an owl's call echoing in the distance. In that sacred space between words, two people who had lost everything found something new, belonging. Later, as Liam slept in the back seat and Ethan drove them home, Elise watched the lights of Amara's haven fade in the rearview mirror. She whispered to the night, You were right, Mom. Ethan glanced at her, his brow raised. Elise smiled faintly. Vivian once told me not to raise Liam like a project, not to live behind glass, that joy should be his birthright. Ethan nodded, his hand resting on her knee. He's living it now. Elise's eyes shone, her voice steady. Because you taught me healing doesn't come from perfection. It comes from presence. Ethan's grip tightened, gentle but sure. No, he said. Healing comes from choosing to stay, even when it's easier to leave. Elise leaned her head against the window, her heart full, and whispered, That might be the only blueprint worth following. The next morning dawned soft, the kind of morning that demanded nothing but offered everything. Gentle light, a whispering breeze, the scent of fresh earth hanging like an unspoken vow. Elise stood barefoot on the porch of Amara's haven, a warm coffee mug cradled in her hands, the building behind her still waking, its halls quiet but brimming with promise. Laughter hadn't yet filled the air, but she knew it would. She smiled, the certainty settling in her chest like a long-lost friend. From the garden's edge, Liam's voice rose, clear and bubbling with delight. Mom, he found one, a big one. She looked over, her heart lifting. Ethan knelt by a flower bed, Liam crouched beside him, both inspecting a fat, wriggling worm as if it were a treasure from a forgotten world. Liam bounced, mud streaking his jeans, joy radiating from every inch of him. Can we name it? He shouted. Elise called back, her voice light. Only if you promise not to bring it inside this time. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, his smirk warm, teasing. No promises. She rolled her eyes, but her smile deepened, a quiet realization blooming. She'd never known mornings could feel like this. Not perfect, not stage, just honest. They spent the morning together, tending the garden, clearing remnants of the weekend's volunteer event, repainting chipped railings with unhurried care. There was no agenda, only a rhythm born of shared purpose. At noon, they sprawled on the front steps, sharing peanut butter sandwiches, orange slices, and lemonade from a mason jar. Liam insisted on sitting between them, a small bridge connecting their hearts. I heard we're getting a piano next week. Elise said, sipping from the jar. Ethan nodded, his eyes crinkling. Donated by a retired music teacher. Said it's seen more mistakes than a math textbook and still sings. Elise smiled, her voice soft. Sounds like all of us. Ethan raised a brow, teasing. You saying we sing now? She tilted her head, playful. We stay in tune most days. Liam, wiping jelly from his chin, chimed in. And we're loud. That's what matters. Their laughter rang out, unscripted and true. The kind that needed no explanation, born of knowing they'd made it. Not out of the fire, but through it, together. That evening, after Liam fell asleep amidst coloring books and wooden blocks, Elise and Ethan sat on the back porch, the sun melting into a fiery orange. Amara's haven glowed softly behind them, its windows warm, alive. Elise turned to him. When we cut the ribbon, I thought that was the ending. Ethan looked at her, his gaze steady. Wasn't it? She shook her head, her voice soft but certain. No, that was just the door opening. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I used to think family was something you're given, not something you make. Elise met his eyes. And now? He paused, searching for words heavy with truth. Now I know family is who stays when it's hard and laughs when it's easy. Elise swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. I spent years protecting myself from needing anyone, thinking if I built big enough walls, nothing could fall apart inside. And what did you learn? He asked, his voice gentle. She turned to him, her eyes steady, shining. That the walls only kept out the things that could have saved me. Sometimes the homes we build aren't made of bricks or walls. They're crafted from patience, second chances, and hands that choose to stay when they could walk away. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Share your stories in the comments. They inspire us too. If you believe in the power of love, healing, and found family, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs a spark of hope today. New stories are coming, tales that remind us you don't have to be perfect to be part of something beautiful. You just have to stay. Thank you for being here, for listening, and above all, for believing in stories that heal.